Afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining in. So this week we have Nick Pappin from Washington State University, and he's going to be talking about the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD. And he tells me that we're even going to see a live demo. So we will wish him luck, and I will turn it over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, my name is Nick Pappin. I work for Washington State University Extension. That is one of the tripartite mission of the land-grant universities, the other two being research and education. And specifically, I work in a group called Community Economic Development. Um, and I specialize in broadband. One thing that I want to ask everybody is that if you have any questions as I'm going along, please feel free to put up your hand. I would much rather answer questions sort of as they come up rather than waiting to the end and, losing a bit of context maybe. So the BEAD program is the current last mile program that is being rolled out in the US right now. We have had a few programs coming up, and let me actually just hit the slides here. So, looking back through history, we've had many programs that largely came out of, well, if we want to go far back, we can talk about DARPA and ARPA. But starting off with the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which really created our modern internet. There was an understanding that we had to basically subsidize still, much in the way that AT&T subsidized to universal service. We've said the internet should be a universal service. We won't get into the whole is it a utility question unless somebody wishes to try and make the argument for it, but um, that led us into BTOP and BIP, and eventually we have Connect America Fund, which we also had the alternative Connect America model, and those are sort of ways to attempt to incentivize private industry to build out to rural areas. Uh, we then had CAF, and currently RDOF is I would say about 50% successful. A lot of locations have actually gotten turned back because, in the late, 2018, 2019 sort of time frame, costs were fundamentally different than they are today. And so we're seeing sort of continual rolling defaults of that program. And we'll talk about how that sort of impacts the current program a little bit. But I just wanted to note that while those programs are older, they are still having impacts today. Um, we also got the USDA Reconnect program, which is one of two programs in USDA that focus on building infrastructure directly. Um, those being Reconnect and Community Connect. And those programs are actually modeled off of the Rural Electrification Act, which I always like to point out is sort of an older, um, while it's considered an old program, I mean that program is still functioning in some ways today, and it started off in the 1930s and 1940s. Um, so. That everybody thinks about the Rural Electrification Act as a legacy um, policy tool. And what it really shows is that small, consistent effort done over time can have huge impacts. Oh, and then the 2020s came around and we had this pandemic, and everybody realized that we should probably be building better internet. And so we got America Rescue Plan. I go with ARPA SLRFRF, which is state and local recovery funds. CPF, which was basically just from the US Treasury given out to the states uh, money to build rural internet. And those projects are so ARPA dollars need to be expended by the end of the year, this year, uh, end of the calendar year, I should be specific on this. Um, CPF dollars have another couple of years worth of stuff happening to them. And then we've got a smattering of other programs, the Middle Mile program, the Tribal Broadband Connectivity program, um, and the Digital Equity Act, which I may touch on here in a bit. But the big sort of last mile funding right now is BEAD. Um, you may have heard John Stewart talking about this with Ezra Klein a while ago about all of the steps. You can feel free to go watch it. It's a very valid critique of how the program has been run. Unfortunately, that's sort of in the past, but we'll move on from there. So, just to level set for all of us, because I mean, yeah, I live in Moscow, Idaho. I have a fiber internet connection to my home. I consider that broadband. Um, that being said, I have also recently lived just outside of Moscow, and been on a 25/3 connection over licensed fixed wireless, really just living that digital divide. And it's a big difference. So level setting as to what is broadband today. Um, Largely, it's all centered around 100 down, 20 up. The NTIA, by and large, follows the FCC. Those are our two major telecommunications agencies for the US. Um, and then states can have individual definitions of broadband. Um, Being that I work for Washington State University, the Washington definitions are 25 down, 3 up to every location in Washington. And that had a goal date of the end of 2024, um, which with the launch of Starlink, at least in Washington, there's about 100, 200 BSLs that Starlink claims they don't serve. It's sort of a weird thing for why they don't claim to serve them. I don't actually really understand why they've decided to call these specific ones out. You know, it isn't like a radio dead zone like around Greenbrier or Green Bank, anything like that. Um, and then BEAD in the statutes, which if you want to go read them, they're there. They actually defined three levels of service. It's unserved, which means that you don't have access to a 25 down, 3 up internet connection. Underserved, which is you don't have access to a 25 down or a 100 down, 20 up internet connection. And then served, which is you have access to a 100 down, 20 up service. And this is where the live demos will come in later. Because we'll look at one county in Washington that I've been doing some work on this week. The tool that we have for measuring broadband in the United States is called the Broadband Data Collection. And actually, I should just stop right now and invite everybody, if you have any questions about what I've just said, please feel free to come off of mute and talk or raise your hand.
So I have one, and it's mostly just because I remember hearing this a couple of years ago, and perhaps it's changed, but I thought that there was like a really big battle that between the satellite providers and the wired providers that they were not going to consider satellite to be broadband. Is that still something that's going on?
Yeah, all right. So this is the concept of tech neutrality. Um, so the way that the IIJA, which is the large bill that created BEAD, um, states it is that technology preferences can be decided by the assistant secretary. Our previous assistant secretary of the NTIA was took the view that basically you had to have terrestrial connectivity. That while LEO and low Earth orbit satellite and geostationary satellite to some degree, you know, it has its problems, but also, if you throw up before Starlink, if you threw up a connection, it may have a massive amount of latency, but at least you can get some amount of connectivity. Um, so when the current administration came in, they sort of said, hey, we want to get rid of this technology preference for the purposes of granting money to the state. And yeah, this is one of those Elon Musk things. Um, I have my own personal thoughts on that, but I'll reserve them for a different time. Um, so the NTIA has taken this weird split brain position where, for the purposes of funding new infrastructure, LEO is not considered served, but for the purposes of building infrastructure, it can become served, basically. Um, that's, let's see here. I did sort of touch on that here with the FCC definition being 100 down, 20 up, all tech, which means that Starlink, aside from about 220,000 locations across the US, serves the US. And actually, Jason, with your pen logo there, for some reason, like 120,000 of them are in the middle of Pennsylvania, unknown as to why.
I think that they have a pretty powerful lobby, if I remember
I mean, it's
correctly.
it's entirely possible. Good question, though. If anybody has any other questions, I'm certainly happy to answer them. And I've been talking about locations because that's sort of the nomenclature of the broadband data collection. Um, a broadband serviceable location is defined here. It's a business or residential location in the United States, which mass market broadband internet access is or can be installed. We'll look at this later in the live demos of what is a BSL and what isn't a BSL. Um, by and large, your house is a BSL. Your shed should not be a BSL. Your chicken coop should not be a BSL. Um, a business downtown should be a BSL. Your locally owned business should be a BSL. Walmart is probably not a BSL, but may have gotten pulled in sometimes. But that's um, those are sort of the dynamics to think about. Um, I included a link. I am happy to share this presentation as well, um, of what is and is not a BSL, but yeah. Um, and that location data tied with the availability data gets us to the national broadband map. If you haven't seen this, it's a really cool website. I'll show it here in a little bit. But it ties the locations to the availability that would be reported by ISPs. And this is what's in those two data sets. So by and large, if you had to report for Form 477, you have to report for the BDC. According to the FCC, every ISP in the US that is operating a commercial service needs to report their availability uh, to the FCC biannually, so twice a year. Um, that goes into the availability data set. All right, and that's the end of the presentation. And now we get into the fun of demos. So let me change the uh, let me change the share here. And again, if anybody has a question, I'm happy to answer. All right, so we're going to focus on Walla Walla, Washington, largely because I already had that data prepared. Um, but it's also a really great, it shows the digital divide actually pretty well. So, and you can go to this map, it's broadbandmap.fcc.gov. Um, you can change the filters. This is Jason, this is going back to your question of terrestrial versus licensed fixed wireless. You can actually choose all of that. If you go to any technology, and I mean, just zoom out, you're getting 100% coverage for wherever there is a BSL. These hexagons are um, generalizations of actual dots and locations. We'll dive into that here in a second. In fact, let's just dive in now. So, for the purposes of talking about this program, I'm actually going to select all terrestrial. Um, and if you zoom in, you get dots on top of houses. And and the really nice thing about the FCC is that if you move around too quickly, sometimes you get the Akamai ban hammer, which is probably what's happening right now. If this was working, and actually I can show this in ArcGIS here in a few minutes, it would show you basically a list of all the providers over here, um, and let you see what the maximum services available are. Let's see if just, yeah, what the maximum services available are. And again, if you change the filters, you'll get a feel for where broadband is or is not. Um, and like I said, I'm going to show this later. The other map that I really want to talk about is the broadband funding map. This gives you a feel for where where projects are actually happening. So let's see here. We'll zoom in on Dayton because I think there's an ARPA project happening here. Yep, there we go. So this is a Capital Projects Fund project. This is building fiber to a rural location right now. And you can get a feel for, sort of project size, um, and that kind of thing. And all of the yellow dots are funded. Um, and then you can also get sort of the availability underneath. Uh, yeah. So, does anybody have any questions there? And I really wish that I could zoom around to other parts of the US, but I think that I'm just going to keep on getting the Akamai banhammer.
So I guess one question I have here is I'm sure that the FCC is probably vetting this data that's being collected here. Are they still using like that UCLA broadband test stuff from Measurement Lab to sort of be the judgment of what these speeds are? Are they relying on self-reporting? What's the garbage in, garbage out on the data here?
Great question. It is total garbage in, garbage out. Um, the FCC, this is self-reported availability data for what can be installed in 10 days on a standard business or on a standard installation. This is not actually tracking which locations have selected which service. So, looking at this location in Dayton, it's not showing the customer has selected, Pocket iNet as their ISP. It just shows that Pocket iNet says they can deliver within 10 days. The other thing that it's not monitoring is service delivery, which is getting back to your question about are they looking at MLab or UCLA? Um, this data set is not really designed for that purpose. It definitely can be used to it could be used to look at that look at that data potentially. You could correlate MLab data uh, to this data set to see, hey, am I ever seeing like P90 data in MLab of a 1 gig internet connection in Dayton, Washington. The other part of that is that determining physical location from IP address is notoriously difficult. Ookla is more aggressive in collecting location data than MLab. Um, Historically, they have been. So the potential data coming out of Ookla could be a little bit better for location specific, but I mean, you're still looking down to city, maybe neighborhood um, kind of data. So, any other question, Jason?
No, it just, having worked with Measurement Lab close to 2 decades ago when I first started with internet too, the whole vision of this was supposed to gather this information and then push it into this database. So it's a little disheartening to know that now they're just still relying on the 10-day rule of, oh, it's possible to get that service for, whatever fee you need to have. And that's how it judges the carrier capability of a hexagon within that area. Um, So no, I don't think I have a question there. More or less just a frustration that
A
that's the
lament.
system that they use. Yeah.
Yeah. So there have been some traditional, or there have been some historical um attempts to actually um measure services delivered. Unfortunately, right now, all of them have kind of sunset. And it's actually interesting you bring up MLab. Sasha Meinrath, who was involved with actually getting MLab spun out of Google, um, has been a colleague of mine for a long time. And actually, he's at your fine institution. So,
Yeah. He's a professor at Penn State now, and I had talked with him and worked with him when he was still at New America. So yeah, all those names are still kicking around the community.
yep, yeah. What is old is new again. Um, and we never really got to figuring out the actual problem there. Um, yeah. So, all right. Well, let's switch over to and really, maybe to defend this a little bit, a part of this is a policy tool. This is meant to sort of um, this is meant to demonstrate availability. Um, and there is the ability, oh, I forgot to show that. You can actually say for any location and challenge the availability. So you can say that service isn't actually available here. Um, and it's as far as I know, the first time that you, outside of doing an FCC complaint uh, on 477 data, which would be difficult. I'm not going to say impossible, but they certainly made the process of quite Byzantine. Um, this allows, feedback directly from consumers. So it's not perfect, but at least it's one small step forward. So I talked about the fabric and I talked about the availability data. Um, when you, oh God, there we go. When you have a fabric license, and unfortunately that is a licensed data product from a company called CostQuest, um, you have to have sort of some specific entities to be able to get it. Most universities are just fine. And there's actually a research license which allows you to publish about it. Um, but that's sort of neither here nor there. Um, when you join these two things together, you can, let's see here, let's look at the related data here. And unfortunately, that's just not coming through right now. So, I may have actually just got unlucky, but let's try. Oh, yeah, I think I got unlucky. Try it one more time, maybe. Well, we'll we'll just do this instead. So, looking at locations in Walla Walla, if you aren't familiar with Washington, Walla Walla it has a couple of very dense areas, but is also has a ton of rural. So down here in the south, around Walla Walla proper and in College Place, there's pretty good density. Then you have Burbank off over here, and you have Prescott and Dayton, no, Waitsburg, sort of off over here. And then the rest is either farmland or um, like foothills going into the blues, which are off here on the east. Um, Looking at this data set, this is the green means the location is served, blue means the location is underserved, red means that the location is unserved. And if we look in here at some of these red dots, there we go. And I apologize for the coloring on this. It's not great. Um, Guess switch over to that. If we look at this location, this is not showing as a BSL. So this is going to be some sort of some sort of, it's a school or something. Um, like I said, when you get into some of the weirdness, some things are considered BSLs and some things aren't. Like apparently this Home Depot is, but the Walmart just down the road isn't. Um, it gets you some data oddities. So, yeah. Um, that being said, so going to, and this is something that I was actually talking about with our broadband action team in Walla Walla. They were asking me about availability. And so I sort of sliced this multiple ways. So this is bead status here. But if we actually were to look at this of instead of being greater than or equal to 100 down, 20 up, one of the layers or one of the data sets I created was what if it's just greater than 100 down and 20 up? So not equal to. So it removes locations that are exactly served by 100 down, 20 up. And then if we just sort of look at this, all of these red dots here that appear green and then as I slide turn red, these are locations that are served by exactly 100 down and 20 up. That means that they weren't eligible for the BEAD service or for BEAD build out. The blue dots represent locations that have, and it's not, but it could be um, 101 down and 21 up. Um, so just giving a feel for where are locations that may have gotten caught in, the bead trap of they were served, but they were very, very minimally served. That's what this is showing. And if we change this, or if we look at this with, if we turn on the bead layer, and I'm going to flip this back to a dark base map because it helps pop out the pop out the yellow. Remember down in here, we had a whole bunch that were minimally served. And so the only bead locations that were picked up weren't listed as having 100 down and 20 up. So, this group of houses and locations are locked in for probably the federal interest period to a 100 down, 20 up internet, which today, I mean, you can stream multiple 4K streams over 100 down, 20 up, but are you going to be able to do whatever the next thing is uh, as we sort of step forward in time, bearing in mind that BEAD has a federal interest period of, for physical infrastructure, I think that's 6 years. For LEO, it's 10 years. So basically, this is locking these locations into 100 down, 20 up for that federal interest period, unless a state wants to weigh in and try and improve connectivity or something changes that way. Honestly, the port or a public utility district, because we have those in Washington, could say that we want to build fiber to the home out to these locations and could fund it internally potentially. So, um, I'm going to show one more thing here. And by the way, all of this data, as soon as the bead, uh, as soon as the bead funds are finalized, which they are going through NTIA and NIST right now to be given to the states, you should start seeing these projects appear on the broadband funding map that I showed earlier. This is using sort of pre-release data from the proposals to generate these maps. Um, with that, oh, last thing, just to give a feel for who won in Walla Walla. Um, we have a local cell company named Inland Cellular. They're a partner to Verizon. Um, and as you can see in Walla Walla County, they won the vast majority of locations, with only a couple here going to SpaceX, which is Starlink. So, with that, I open the floor to any questions, and I thank you all for your time.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick, for going through all that. There was one question. I didn't see it when it came in from Ausiel. Is it possible to see dark fiber availability?
Mm. So, um, yeah, there are a couple of tricks that you could use. You could definitely infer that, wherever you see a fiber to the home internet connection, you could infer that, fiber has to be sort of middle mile available in that community. Again, doesn't actually mean that it is affordable. Doesn't mean that it's really accessible even. It could be, private backhaul that a telephone company uh, doesn't want to share. Um, in Washington, we actually, going back to our ports and PUDs, so the PUDs came out of basically the Bonneville Power Administration having excess power because in the 40s and 50s and 60s, we built some bombs in Washington at this little site called Hanford, um, which actually is just off to the east of or off to the west of this county. Um, they actually had fiber that they put on their long distance transmission telephone poles or power poles that then the PUDs leased and conglomerated into an organization called NOAANET, or the Northwest Open Access Network. Um, and at this point, the BPA actually wants to move NOAANET off of their transmission lines because they want to use it for more advanced signaling. And so you do sort of see that back and forth change, um, and moving from, yes, there is actually backhaul to you need to build backhaul and move off of essentially government leased infrastructure. So, I don't know that that fully answered your question, but you could infer it based on the availability data sets.
All right. Does anybody have any other questions for Nick? All right. Well, thank you so much, Nick. And if you can remember to send me those slides, I'll make sure that they get put in there with the recording.
I am happy to do that. I'll be sure to do that before I go and grab lunch because, like I said, I'm on the West Coast, so
All right.
still
And for
morning.
everybody else, we don't have a talk next week. There'll be a 1 week break. Uh, but the week after, it'll be March 6th, and it'll be Couple Agarwal from ESNet. And he is going to be talking about Kubernetes, but specifically Kubernetes for network infrastructure engineers. He's going to try to make it be a little bit more approachable for all of us. So hopefully everybody can join that one. So we'll talk to everybody in 2 weeks. Bye all.
See ya.